Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Mercury. I'm a first year neurology resident and I'm going to pose a few questions to you today, starting with what would you do if you suddenly stopped remembering where you are and how you got there? If your family called again and again and tried to remind you that you are currently in a hospital and are undergoing investigations in order to find out why you forget. If your last vivid memory was sometime around the last year and everything since then is completely blank. How would you reconstruct your life? How would you maintain relationships? How would you get your sense of continuity? And how would you answer the question, how are you feeling today? I bring you today a real life case that greatly reminded me of the well-known book and movie called Before I Go to Sleep. Since I'm quite a movie buff myself, I'm going to try to give it my non-spoiler review in just 10 seconds. In summary, Nicole Kidman is the interrogated amnesiac. We undergo her adventure, and through her lenses we see a medical issue that's represented quite well with accuracy. But towards the end, they give it this whole criminal spin and end on a quite optimistic last scene considering the circumstances. A friend has described this movie as the unfunny version of 50 First Dates, so watch that instead if you want the rom-com version of events. For people watching this video, having seen the movie or read the book, I will reference the plot broadly at several times throughout this case report, and for those that haven't seen the movie, I strongly recommend that you do, and hear my real-life encounter with the main character's counterpart. What are we dealing with here? I'm going to talk about a young woman with progressively worsening interrogated amnesia and seizures. This meant that she couldn't gather any new information. Her short-term memory was gravely affected, a situation which had arisen almost a year ago, not long after the birth of her second-born son. The cause of such a pathology is multifold. Differing from the movie's version of events, where a traumatic encounter had provoked the incident, our patient had the brain inflammation, with still unknown origin. So, based on the story that the family has told us, we can describe her seizures as such. I'm going to provide some examples that would make you understand the kind of seizures we're talking about. Firstly, they were tonic-clonic generalized, meaning the kind of seizures you can probably see in pop culture and reference. They had involuntary movements of the limbs, especially the upper arms, and tongue biting, which left small lesions on the side of her tongue. Without sphincter relaxation, without postcritic confusion, lasting about 2 to 3 minutes. So, what is our hypothesis for the cause of such issues? Well, here are the 4 parts that are responsible for our memory. The hippocampus is most closely situated to the temporal lobe, here seen in blue, which is situated close enough in order to be the main generator of her epileptic crisis. This hippocampus, this seahorse-like structure, is part of the limbic system and is one of the only tissues that are capable of creating new neuron cells. And this is quite useful, as you can imagine, when gathering new memories. So what is our next step? Besides the already discussed reasons for presentation, our patient had an atypical clinical image, more suggestive of a cerebellar lesion than a hippocampic one. She had ataxia, which meant that she couldn't coordinate her upper limb movement. Also, postural tremor, meaning she couldn't hold her hands out without small oscillations. Nystagmus, which meant an involuntary movement of the eye when watching something laterally, and generalized hypotonia, meaning a lack of muscle tension. However, MRI confirmed such a supposition, that of a cerebellum implication. The lesion was located quite clearly in the hippocampus bilaterally, and also in the adjacent temporal lobes. In times, the mark of an active lesion, such as the one showed in the MRI image provided, turned into that of a hippocampal sclerosis, proof that the damage had already been done and what we were dealing with here was a scar. What followed was the use of other neurodiagnostic tools, namely electroencephalography or EEG, in order to quantify the electrical translation of her epileptic seizures, which thankfully were not present in a symptomatic manner during her stay in our hospital. Lumbar puncture also helped us find, alongside her blood seric sampling, the antibodies responsible for her condition. What is this condition? Limbic encephalitis is the chosen diagnosis, but it comes in two flavors. The first is that of a paraneoplastic version, in which a cancerous tumor is responsible for a distant autoimmune inflammation, meaning that our own body fights against itself, but instead of striking against the tumor, it becomes active in a different tissue, and in this scenario, that tissue is the brain. And the second option, which here is represented in green, is an autoimmune disorder in the absence of a neoplasm. Let us put our minds to the original drawer's idea and see what we can find, because the answer might surprise you. Using a CT scan of the whole body, we managed to see a tumor associated with the right ovary. This tumor, in correlation with a growth of seric values of CA125, which is the main tumoral marker associated with ovarian cancer, led to a daring laparoscopic procedure, with the role of diagnosis said cancer and, if found, excising it. For better or worse, the bioptic tissue that was extracted from the cyst demonstrated that it was not actually tumorous or cancerous in nature, but most likely a mark of an extrauterine ovarian pregnancy, meaning that an embryo had returned to the ovary and probably became non-viable, transforming into a cyst. Even if this idea might sound alien, it's more common than you think for a pregnancy which stopped in evolution. What to do in such a complex situation? Treatment should be directed to 3 lines of action. That's what the studies tell us when dealing with limbic encephalitis: immunotherapy, symptomatic treatment, and also the diagnosis and the treatment of underlying autoimmune disorders or underlying cancer. In the absence of the third option, because no cancer could be found or any autoimmune disease diagnosed, the 2 other lines remains. So we control the post-puncture headaches using antialgic treatment, such as the one presented. Her electrical seizures were reduced in frequency and intensity with anti-epileptic treatment. So we are left with immunotherapy, which had 2 steps, the first of which was corticotherapy, and afterwards it was followed by IgIV therapy. The last option would be best described by the expression "fight fire with fire." When our own body fights against itself by producing antibodies targeted to our own tissues, the solution would be to intravenously administer antibodies which had been collected by various donors and which had various specificity, and use them to prevent the immune system from targeting its own cells. So, question answered, another one arises. The question answered is that of the origin of the problem: limbic encephalitis with anti-GOD antibodies. GOD being an enzyme found in neurons, which is essential to generating the action potential and which is needed for excitation and also for conduction. The question that remains is, does finding the source of the problem truly fix the issue? I won't spoil the ending of the movie, but it offers, as I said before, an optimistic view. Anterograde amnesia can be beaten. Our protagonist starts remembering things, all through the power of love. But real life is quite different. Truth beats fiction, even though we all love a good story. I'll be blunt, the patient had persistent amnesia all throughout her long stay in our hospital. Every once in a while, she talked to me. She talked to me about her children, about how much she loves them, how much she misses them. her whole face lit up. And she felt alive in that moment. Her eyes had so much more to give to the world, so much more to experience. Every time we tested her cognitive functions, she would get really excited, really get into it, and start to approach these exercises like a child would approach a game he would want to win. He would really want to win. Another thing she was passionate about was the trust she put in her caregivers. Each and every day, she tried to remember the names of the doctors and the nurses that took care of her. And she really believed that a doctor's profession is a noble one. She told me once that only a true hard worker could choose such a career path. Studies support this trust because they show that cognitive rehabilitation, mental exercises if you will, can increase the latency before the memory resets, from that of a mere day towards a week or even a month. Using a camera or diary, furthermore, in order to train oneself the next morning, giving oneself tips and instructions, can prolong this effect even more. This was an idea that was actually expressed in fiction, in the movie and the book, with true value in real life. Following these methods, I hope that we can offer her the continuity needed in order to live a somewhat normal life. Thank you all for watching. I was Dr. Mercury, and I invite you all to subscribe to this channel, which will provide both a medical journal and a personal journal as I continue my steps throughout neurology, medicine, and real life occasionally.